Atholedales in their beauty sublime, carved out from the limestone plateau by streams which first flowed in the early days of time. Such sculpture none but nature can show. Now see the grey cliffs and the slithering scree, where the stone crop and wild cranesbill grow, where fossilized corals and shellfish we see that tell a tale of long, long ago.
We're going to look at some of the most characteristic plants which grow in this dale and the factors which affect their distribution. Here's Dr. Philip Grime.
This large grass is Aranathromylatius, the false oat. And we can see that in its spring condition we have both the remnants of last year's foliage, these quite tall shoots now in a very dry condition, and down at the base here we have the new shoots of the current year's growth. We're on the north-facing slope here, and the soil pH is about 7. In August, Aranathromylatius gives large parts of the south-facing slope a yellowish appearance. This small grass is Festuca ovina, the sheep's fescue. As you can see, it is very small in stature. It has very narrow leaves and white sheaths at the base. It's a species which is extremely resistant to grazing, and in areas such as this, it is tending now to be suppressed by the deposition of litter from these larger vigorous grasses such as Aranathrum, which are tending to take over following the removal of sheep and rabbits from the dale sides. Festuca ovina grows in all parts of the valley, but typically in drier situations such as rock outcrops on the south-facing slope. This small herbaceous plant is Succisa pratensis, which, as you see, has a short rhizome, fleshy roots. In this situation, on the north-facing slope, it's interesting to find that it's growing with two plants which are more familiar as marsh plants. Here, Geum ravali, water avens, and here, Angelica sylvestris. And the fact that these three plants can grow together here on the north-facing slope indicates that in this situation they're avoiding drought. I'm on the plateau now above the dale, and we have a very different type of grassland vegetation here. We have isolated tussocks of Narda stricta, mat grass, but most of the vegetation is dominated by one species, Dischampsia flexuosa. If we look closely at this grass, we find that it resembles Festuca ovina in many ways. It has very narrow leaves. But unlike Festuca ovina, it's here forming quite extensive mats, and we can see that beneath the living leaves there's a quite deep accumulation of dead material. By August, Dischampsia flexuosa is in flower, and the rather delicate heads are very easily recognized. Potentilla erecta is also commonly found on the plateau among the grasses. On the south-facing slope, there's a mosaic of habitats. At the foot of the slope, we have scree in the centre, composed of large blocks of limestone, a coarse open scree, with its fringe of stabilized scree. Higher on the slope, we have areas of grassland, and higher still, areas of rock outcrop with small cliffs. Each of these habitats has its characteristic assemblage of plants. This is Festuca ovina, which here is forming a compact tussock composed of narrow leaves which are enrolled. rather higher on the slope, we have Helianthemum chamisistus, rock rose. Now, this species has small leaves and woody stems connected to a thick, very woody root, which penetrates to quite a deep level in the limestone, usually penetrating fissures there. On the south-facing slope, the grassland is exposed to greater sunlight, and the temperatures tend to be very much higher. And one result of this is that the vegetation tends to be subjected to droughting. And we can see evidence of this in that the turf structure is discontinuous. There are many isolated tussocks, and between these we can see bare rock exposed and a good deal of bare soil. And in these patches of bare soil we find seedlings of various perennial plants and annual plants also. Now we can see in August that the north-facing slope is covered by rank vegetation. There are tall grasses and tall herbs. Among these herbs we have here meadow sweet, and here valerian, and in places we have the very conspicuous inflorescences of Angelica sylvestris. And these are all plants which are normally associated with damp meadows and marshes. I've picked out some of the characteristic plants growing in different parts of the valley. We want to find out why they grow in certain places and not in others. We've taken samples of the vegetation in this dale and also over a wide range of other habitats in Derbyshire. There's 4 quadrats. Each quadrat contains 25 squares, so that makes 100 in one sample. We count the number of squares in which rooted specimens are found. In Atholedale, 3 of the common grasses show quite different distributions. First, Festuca ovina. The frequencies are shown by the different sizes of the white squares. Festuca ovina occurs all over Atholedale, but Dischampsia and Arenatherum are more localized and don't overlap in distribution at all. One of the reasons for the differences in plant distribution could be the soil. Here's Dr. Ian Rorison.
This profile is fairly typical of the soils found on the plateau. It's about 20 centimeters deep and consists of several well-defined layers. Immediately below the living vegetation is about a 5 to 6 centimeter layer of organic matter, the top centimeter of which is easily recognized as dead material. It's followed by what is known as the F layer of about 2 centimeters, which is partly decomposed, and then by the H layer of about 1 centimeter, which is almost completely decomposed humus. This moves into the mineral soil layer, which at the top is darkly stained with humus. The color fades gradually until one comes to this gray ash-like layer, which is at the bottom of the so-called A horizon. We then move into the parent material, this brown soil at the bottom. As we move down the profile, the root density decreases, so that most of the feeding roots are in fact in the top organic layer. Because of this gray ash layer in the middle of the profile, we would call this soil an incipient podsol. We are now on the north-facing slope, where the soil is very different from the plateau. We're on a slope of some up to 25 degrees, where there's a very thin covering of soil over stabilized scree. This creates problems for digging a profile, because in some places the soil is up to 10 centimeters deep, and in others only 1 or 2. The slope consists of a series of limestone steps filled in to varying degrees with soil from anything from 1 to 6 centimeters in depth, and of uniform texture right from the living vegetation down to the limestone rock surface, which you can see here. The major interest of this profile is that the organic matter is very rapidly incorporated into the mineral soil, giving one a very good texture and crumb structure and color, which is uniform throughout the profile. The soil also contains very fine amounts of limestone, much broken up, and roots are contained in the profile right to the base. We're now on the south-facing slope, another typical shallow calcareous soil overlying limestone. So let's have a look at the profile here. It has a depth of about 5 centimeters and is a typical AC soil in that there is no undecomposed litter, and the uniform color and texture is maintained down the profile. There is a very good structure in the soil, and you will notice it contains a very large number of small weathered fragments of limestone quite near the surface. The root systems here penetrate the soil to a depth of 6 centimeters, and some of the more woody species with long tap roots move right down through the fissures of the limestone into the rock surface. So the soil varies a great deal in the Dale. The lowest average pH at 3.75 is very acid indeed. The north-facing slope is nearly neutral, but on the south-facing slope it's definitely alkaline with a pH over 7.
The microclimate of the plant is what we need to know. The temperature above the ground and in the soil below. There's radiation from the sun and moisture tension too. It's measuring, plotting, data logging all the long year through. So once a week I find myself upon the steep dale side, where ants and spiders, moles and voles and data loggers hide. Yes, camouflage so none may see its most incongruous shape. The data logger keeps its records on magnetic tape. That solar emitter, you'll agree, would not look out of place if resting on the lunar soil or sailing out in space. But though its eyes are spaceward turned, the Earth must be its station, whilst measuring total and diffuse solar radiation.
I've extracted part of our temperature log over 5 days in June. This is the air temperature on the south-facing slope. The diurnal range is surprisingly large. You notice immediately how the soil temperature varies with the air temperature, but the total range is less. Temperature differences might help explain plant distribution, so we've compared soil temperatures from south-facing with the north-facing slopes. And there is consistently quite a big difference of 5 or even 10 degrees most of the time. We think this could be an important factor influencing the distribution of plants in the Dale.
Back to the lab where now the data process has begun. Translate, encode and try, though problems still we face, to simulate the climate in a 5-foot cubic space.
Here's Philip Grime again.
Well, we're in one of the university's plant growth rooms, and as you can see, this is an environment in which it's possible to grow plants under very strictly controlled conditions. We have standard illumination from the fluorescent tubes above. There is standardized plant temperature here. At the moment, we're running at 20 degrees centigrade. The humidity is controlled by means of atomizers below the floor of the cabinet. And it is an environment in which it's possible to conduct experiments at different times under fairly identical conditions. And in the chamber at the moment, you see that we have a very large number of Petri dishes. And in these we have seeds which are going through the Nature Conservancy's screening program for germination. A second part of the work in the unit here concerns the growth and growth rates of plants. And using these controlled environments, it is possible to examine the capacity of plants to produce dry matter under strictly controlled conditions. And in the container which you see here, we have a nettle plant, along with some of its fellows, which have been grown for a period of 4 weeks in this growth room environment. And we are, in fact, just about to harvest them as part of the experiment. And nettle is among the fastest growing of the native plants. And if we compare its stature, its size at this point in time, if we compare it with this plant of Origanum vulgare, we can see that, in fact, nettle is capable of phenomenal growth in comparison with this native British species. This is a thermogradient bar. Along this bar, we have a gradient from 5 degrees centigrade to 40 degrees centigrade. When seed has been shown from the growth room experiments to be capable of germination, it's brought down here and placed at intervals along the bar. And we then examine the seeds at daily intervals to examine the pattern of germination. As we move from the very coldest cloches further along the bar, we see that, in fact, there are fewer seeds remaining. The seeds have germinated. This species is Galium aperini. And this is the position corresponding to 10 degrees centigrade. Most of the seeds have germinated and have been removed, but here is one of the last seeds germinating. On an adjacent bar, we have seeds of the small seeded species Centaureum erythrea. And we can see that they have not germinated at 10 degrees centigrade. But if we move further along the bar, we can see that most of the seeds have germinated at 20 degrees centigrade and have been removed.
These are some of the plants from the dales which we've grown under controlled environment conditions for 5 weeks. If we take the example of Arenatherum, we see that it grows relatively well on the south-facing slope and almost equally well on the north-facing slope. But on the plateau, the plants are very much more stunted and a pale green, suggesting, among other things, a lack of nitrogen. As an interesting contrast, we have grown Arenatherum plants for the same length of time in a commercial potting compost. And you can see the much greater vigor of this plant, which potentially has a very high relative growth rate when it is given a complete range of nutrients. The root penetration is good, and it's also good in the plateau soil, which contains the calcium carbonate, whereas on the plateau soil, both the tops and the roots of the plants are very restricted in growth, and you can see that there are no roots penetrating through the bottom of the pot. Helianthemum, like Arenatherum, is restricted in the dales to the south-facing slopes. but it also responds in a similar way to Arenathrum in that it grows well on the south and north-facing slopes and reasonably well on the plateau with calcium carbonate added, but fails dramatically on the plateau, where after 5 weeks there are only 2 seedlings surviving on average, and those are very stunted and discolored. Centaurea is restricted in the field to the north-facing slopes. From purely chemical reasons, it grows equally well on both the north and the south-facing soils. It's largely a matter of soil moisture which controls its distribution in the field. Again, like Arenathrum and Helianthemum, it grows very badly on the plateau soil. Its seedlings have survived the 5-week period, but they too are rather stunted, although one can see that some individual plants are capable of surviving and growing rather better than others. Festuca ovina occurs on all the soil types in the Dale, and as we might have expected from its natural distribution, it grows reasonably well on all the 3 soils which we have brought into the laboratory, and reflects only slight differences in fertility of those 3 soils.
The laboratory results can be related to data from our vegetation survey. These are observed frequencies at sites of different pH throughout the whole region. In the middle of the pH range, the 2 distributions overlap, but it's really unusual to find a site where both species are growing together. So what are the typical habitats in the north of England for these 2 plants? Here's Arenathrum, growing in a species-rich meadow on alkaline soil in Millersdale. This is an area of acid soil, but Arenathrum has invaded along the roadside where limestone rock has been used in the road making. Dischampsia, which we know can survive very high soil acidity, grows well in quite inhospitable places. This is an old quarry on the Millstone Grit. Even more characteristic is another man-made habitat, not far from the middle of Sheffield.
So nature has her secrets while the plant ecologists strive to find out how and where and why each plant should grow and thrive. For some prefer the shaded slopes where the soil is rich and moist. Some they like to face the sun while others make no choice.